Yá'át'ééh, my relatives. Hello, this is Mark Charles. Today is Tuesday, July 9th, and I'm sitting here with my second cup of coffee. We're having a bit of a heat wave here in Washington, and so I have iced coffee this morning. Actually, it's afternoon now, but I've been drinking iced coffee for my second cup recently because it's getting pretty warm here. But I want to start again, like I do, as I always do, by acknowledging I'm speaking to you from Washington, D.C., the traditional lands of the Piscataway. And I want to honor the Piscataway as the hosts of the land where I'm living. I want to thank them for the stewardship of these lands. And just want to state how humble I am to be moving, living, breathing, walking on these lands today. So, Yá'át'ééh, my Piscataway relatives, thank you for your stewardship of these lands. So, as I was debating what to talk about today, I mean, there's a lot of things going on. Obviously, the Supreme Court has made some pretty radical decisions in the past few weeks. And it looks like, oh, my camera just caught up with me. So the Supreme Court's made a few decisions in the past few weeks. There's also been some things going on with Joe Biden, obviously the fallout from his most recent debate and calls for his departure from the 2024 candidate campaign. There's also a lot going on both in Gaza as well as Ukraine and other places like that. But I wanted to talk a little bit about air conditioning, surfing, and the 2024 Olympics today. So if you've been paying attention, obviously the 2024 Summer Olympics are starting to begin in Paris in just a few weeks. I think July 26th is the first day, is the opening ceremony day. And obviously, this is a global event. People flying from all over the world to attend these games, and even millions, even billions of more people will tune in on television sets around the globe to watch these games. They have become a very, very major production, often driving the host countries into massive amounts of debt with tons of new building projects and venues that they build for these games that don't get utilized after the games. And so going into the Paris Games, and if you remember, Paris was the place of signing the climate change accord a while ago, and so Paris has been kind of in the forefront, or at least very much in the dialogue around sustainable building and environmental change and climate change and all that kind of stuff. And so the organizers of the Paris Games really wanted to take seriously emission output and climate change in their planning for the 2024 Summer Olympics. And so I'm going to share with you a few stories. These were from a news source called Euronews, and I'm going to put them into the chat right now. I see Jessica is here. Yá'át'ééh, Jessica, thanks for joining. George and Phil Fox, Yá'át'ééh, thank you, my relatives, for joining today. It's good to see you. George, yes, I saw that. I was looking at the Pacific Northwest. Both Portland and Seattle are hitting the 100-degree temperatures. There's a massive heat wave going on across the U.S., primarily in the Pacific Northwest and on the East Coast. DC is right in the middle of it, but Portland and Seattle and other places, California, are also having record-breaking temperatures. So please stay cool, my relatives. Be wise when you venture out. And I actually want to talk a little bit more about that in my podcast today. Talk about even what we need to do personally to help train our bodies for this coming period of climate change and global warming. But yes, so anyway, so if you look at this article in Euronews, they actually talk a lot about the way the organizers of the Paris Olympics were trying to keep emissions and carbon output in mind as they designed the venues and planned where they were going to have events. They were putting solar panels on a lot of older buildings. They were trying to source most of the vendors and the food locally so that they weren't shipping products in from all over the world. They even designed the housing in where the athletes are going to be housed without air conditioning, but using kind of a water cooling system that was going to be more environmentally friendly. And they also built the buildings in a way that they wouldn't be receiving much direct sunlight, so they could keep the indoors cooler. They were doing a lot of things to kind of keep the carbon emissions of the Olympic Games down. Dottie, Yá'át'ééh, I just saw Dottie here from Holbrook, Arizona, not too far from where I used to live out in Cross Canyon. Thanks for joining. It's great to have you with us today. But anyway, so there were these very robust plans, and of course there were protests on both sides, and people were protesting they weren't doing enough. Other people saying that they weren't taking the athletes and the games in with much seriousness, and they were prioritizing climate change over the venues of the games. And so there was a lot of protests on both sides. But then, if you'll remember, one of the things they were going to do is they decided to use a more fuel-efficient cooling system with the way they built the buildings for housing the athletes, as well as using cooler water pumped from the ground. That was going to keep the buildings cooler. And beginning, I don't know if we were the first, but the United States and Australia and Canada all very much balked at that and said, no, we can't do that, and said that they were going to be bringing in their own air conditioners for their athletes at these games. And first of all the articles I've read, and there were many articles I looked over in this, Australia, Canada, and the US were some of the three main countries who were jumping on board first, saying we're going to bring our own air conditioners in. And right, all three of these places, because most European nations are colonial. But most of the colonial nations in Europe no longer occupy many of the lands they colonized. They do some yet, but they have largely retreated from much of their colonial ways. But the United States of America, Canada, and Australia, the colonizers are still living on the lands they colonized and still oppressing the people that they stole the land from. And so it's very ironic. And these were three of the nations who have some of the highest carbon output in the globe, right? These are the nations that have been some of the worst polluters, not just in the past decade, but over the past 2 centuries. And these were some of the first nations to say, no. I know we signed this accord. I know that we're trying to take climate change, but come on, this is the Olympics. We can't actually do that for the Olympics. And we have to prioritize not only the health, but the performance of our athletes. And so we are going to be bringing our own air conditioners. And I mean, just when I first read about this a few weeks ago or a few months ago, I kind of dismissed it, because I'm embarrassed with American tourists anyway, right? Whenever Americans tour around the globe, they expect everyone to speak English. They treat everyone like they're some kind of their subjects to be studied, or people to entertain them, or people to host them, right? And we want things our way. We want McDonald's where we go. We don't want to speak our own language. And we do very little to respect the traditions, the language, the cultures, or the people of the lands that we're being tourists to. And because of this, right, I rarely travel overseas with a group of Americans. I almost always go with a small group, myself, maybe a few other people. And I always try to be hosted locally by people who actually live in the cities and the places I go into. Because I really dislike the way that Americans behave and conduct themselves especially when they tour what are often referred to, what Americans refer to as third world countries. And so, we see enough of this coming to our reservations, of people coming just with horrible attitudes and mentalities, and not wanting to respect our language, our culture, our people when they're on our lands. And right. So when I first read that, my first thought was, oh, these are just American tourists, right? Whether it's our athletes or our Olympic organizers or the U.S. Olympic Committee, we're just being Americans. We're just being U.S. citizens, right? Which is demanding our comfort and our convenience as the pinnacle of everything else, including issues like global warming. But then when I saw other nations were jumping on board with this, and especially other colonial nations were jumping on board with this. And then I began looking at how even the organizers of the games in Europe were beginning to give in to the demands of colonial nations like the US and Australia and Canada. Then that's when things got a little bit more concerning. And so this is one story I'm going to share with you. This is the AP News story, which talks about US Olympic and other teams will be bringing their own air conditioners to the games. This is another story about the same topic that was run on CBS. The first one was on AP News. And I think what I want to say about this is this, my relatives, is where the rubber meets the road when it comes to climate change, right? This is where the rubber meets the road. Are we going to take seriously these commitments we make to addressing climate change? And yes, some of these things around the Olympics are symbolic, but they're also not real, right? I mean, the Olympics is a very big venue, which has a massive carbon output. And so I think the fact that the organizers are trying to take this seriously, and then for the US to completely poo-poo that and say, no, we're going to bring on air conditioners because our convenience and our comfort is a priority for us. I mean, this is why the United States struggles to be a global leader. It doesn't matter if Trump or Biden's in office, right? It doesn't matter if it's a Democrat or Republican. These are American values. This is the way we as a nation conduct ourselves on the global stage, which is when it comes to our performance, our convenience, our comfort, whether it's our military or our athletes, we're like, that takes priority over everything else. And this would have been a great chance for our nation to take a lead, or at least to be humble enough to say, yeah, we're going to submit ourselves to this commitment we made in this city not too long ago to take climate change seriously. We're going to respect what the organizers are doing. And there will be a lot of arguments made about the performance and even some of the safety of the athletes. And I want to address that because we are talking about some of the top tier athletes in the world, not just coming from Western colonial nations like the United States and Australia, but people coming from Africa and the Polynesian Islands and places all around the globe. And these aren't the nations that are saying we're bringing our own air conditioners with us. Why? Because they live in places where, A, that's not really an option economically, and B, they live most of their lives without air conditioning in the first place. And so, yeah, would it be an adjustment? Absolutely. Would we have to train for it? Absolutely. Do we need to make sure that we're not harming the health of our athletes? Absolutely. But we have to realize here, people, we are dealing with a changing climate. We are not dealing with a couple summers of some bad weather coming up. We are dealing with a changing climate. And so we have to learn how to adjust our living in a world that is getting hotter. And the solution to that is not just to stay in our air-conditioned houses longer and bring air conditioners when we travel to places that don't have them. That's not the solution. As you know, over the past year, I've been walking a lot. I began walking about a year ago after my hip surgery, and I now walk anywhere from 6 to 8 miles a day. And one of the places I walk is I have an office. It's about a mile from my house, and I walk there once, maybe even twice a day. There's a grocery store right there that I usually get our fruits and vegetables for the day at, our dairy products for the day from that grocery store. So I walk to get food. And even in this past week, when the temperatures have been getting higher and the humidity has become more oppressive here in DC, I still opted to walk to the mile to the grocery store rather than to drive there. And the reason I did that is because the climate's changing. The world's getting hotter. I have to acclimate myself to living in a world that's going to be a bit harsher than the world I grew up in. That doesn't mean I take crazy risks and do something that's going to endanger my health. I take water with me. I try to go in the cooler times of the day. But the solution is not just to drive more, especially a mile away. That's not very far. I'm literally training myself to how to live more sustainably in the era of global warming. And I think that's what we need to do, especially as colonial nations. We've gotten so unbelievably used to our air-conditioned houses and buildings and cars that we can't fathom giving them up. You've heard me say this before, but right, I mean, we could, if we want to address, if we want our politicians to take climate change seriously, all we have to do is turn off the air conditioning in the Capitol building for the months of July and August. That's all we have to do. And those frail old white men sitting in those offices will immediately realize, holy crap, we have a problem here and we have to find a way to fix it. Because they go from their air-conditioned apartments to their air-conditioned cars to their air-conditioned offices to their air-conditioned Capitol meeting places, right? They don't have to deal with this. And so this is why I think, not that we need to put lives in danger, but we have to recognize the world is getting hotter. And the solution is not just to sit in our air-conditioned houses longer. That is not the solution. The solution is not just to start traveling with our personal portable air conditioners around the globe when we visit places that don't have air conditioning in every building. That's not the solution. We have to begin to change the way we conduct our lives. We have to begin to live differently. I was reminded, right, and just so you know, this is not a partisan problem. Towards the end of his second term in office, President Obama visited South Africa, and he was talking to some of the youth in South Africa. I'm going to share this story. This is on CNN. It's from 2013, and it's when he was at a youth climate change meeting in South Africa, and he addressed global issues that were going on. And one of the things he addressed was global warming. And this is what he said. He said, the world's biggest environmental challenge is climate change, Obama said, adding that carbon emissions are warming the planet and threaten to cause the problem to spin out of control. Quote, we are going to all have to work together to find ways in which collectively we reduce carbon. But wealthy countries must do more than countries that are still developing, he said. Obviously, they shouldn't be resigned to poverty simply because the West and Europe and America got there first. That wouldn't be fair, but everyone's going to have to do something. If, however, he went on to say, everyone buys cars, installs air conditioners, and moves into bigger houses, the planet will boil over unless we find new ways of producing energy, he said. So he was literally challenging these youth to not aspire to more air conditioning, to not aspire to bigger houses, to not aspire to more cars. He basically said, all of you can't live like Americans because that would be unsustainable. Now, the irony of that is a few years later, after he got out of office, President Obama and his wife, Michelle, bought a massive house in Martha's Vineyard, much larger than they needed, with multiple garages, and I'm sure numerous air conditioners, if not an incredibly robust central air conditioning system. Spending over $10 million, almost $12 million on this house. So basically, he told the youth of Africa, you can't live like Americans. We all are in this collectively. And then he came home, got out of office, and went out and bought the biggest house he could possibly find and moved into it, throwing all of his integrity out the window. So yes, I criticized Trump for pulling us out of global climate agreements. I criticize the Republicans for the way they refuse to take this issue seriously, but I also call out the incredible lack of integrity that Democrats have, who are willing to go on the global stage and say we must make these sacrifices, but then absolutely refuse to make them when it comes to their personal choices of how they live and what they do within their own homes. And so the fact that the U.S. Olympic team and other colonial nations are refusing to submit to what the organizers and the host country of France is putting into place by traveling with our own air conditioners, that's just the tip of the iceberg of the problem. The problem is we have this mentality that says we are exceptional and we have to make rules for the globe, but not for us. We are not held. We are not beholden to those things. The globe has to recognize they can't all get air conditioners. But not only are we going to buy massive houses with more air conditioners and rooms than we possibly need, but we are going to travel with them whenever we go to any of these countries because we can't submit ourselves to that type of inconvenience. And then because I was looking at colonial issues around the Olympics, and it struck me that the most colonial nations were the one refusing to go without air conditioning for the Olympic Games. I also looked at France, right? And you would say, well, France is trying to be decolonized, right? They're the ones who are trying to be more environmentally friendly and all this other stuff. But remember, France is a colonial nation. Napoleon, France discovered the Mississippi River, right? They discovered the whole Mississippi watershed. We bought the Louisiana Purchase from France because they had the right of discovery over the entire Mississippi River watershed, right? France is absolutely a colonial nation, and they still have territories around the world. And one of their territories is French Polynesia and Tahiti. And the French Olympic organizers decided that they were going to hold the surfing competition in Tahiti, in a very small village that has some incredible waves. And they were going to do it so that people they'd have to watch it on TV because you can't even see these waves well from the land. So it would have to, they, even if they were there, they'd have to almost watch it all on TV, because the waves are so far out because of the coral reefs that are there. But they made this decision for a territory of France, for a village that still lives off of the food they catch in the ocean. And they begin to impose these massive building projects. And the people of that village had to fight so they didn't completely destroy their coral reef and their way of life for 1 week of surfing for the Olympics. And this article I just put in there in AP News, it talks about how the Olympic organizers made misstep after misstep as they imposed this surfing site on the Tahitian people. So yeah, it's not like one side is good and one side's bad. I mean, these games, because of how commercial they are, just they're massive colonial, whether it's the carbon output or the way they're just bulldozing almost anything that gets in the way of the commercial value of what these games have become to represent. And this is again where the rubber hits the road, my relatives. This is where we need to make a decision. What are we going to do? Are we going to just continue entertaining ourselves and treating the globe the way we've been treating it for the past few centuries? Are we going to take seriously our commitment to address things like climate change? And to realize not only do we have to live in the world that's getting hotter, but we have to find a way to live in this world that's getting hotter in a way that is more sustainable than the way we're living today. We have to figure this out. And the solution is not just traveling with more air conditioners and continuing to bulldoze rural, even indigenous communities so that our big commercial enterprises can continue to move forward. We need to rethink these things, my relatives. Now, again, please hear me. I am not advising you go out and take risks with your health regarding the heat. You need to be very, very wise. Know what your body can tolerate. Take water with you. I just read a horrible story the other day of some motorcyclists who were touring through Death Valley, and it was 128 degrees. And one of them, I think, several of them got sick, and I think one of them even died. So yeah, this heat is becoming deadly. It absolutely is, and we need to take that seriously. But again, the solution is not just sitting inside and air conditioning all the time. That's not the way we're going to solve this problem. So these are my thoughts, my relatives. I hope these are both challenging as well as thought-provoking for you. I am not sure. I'm interesting to see what happens in these Olympics. And to hear the final output of what was the carbon output for the Olympics and how much were they able to make them more environmentally friendly. And what are we going to do seriously as nations moving forward as things like this continue to bump up against us. And we have to recognize, especially for U.S. citizens, this isn't a partisan problem. We cannot just blame. And yes, Republicans absolutely live in denial of climate change. I don't deny that. They do. But the Democrats, as demonstrated by the words of President Obama and then the purchase of his home, have absolutely no integrity or very little integrity on a global level when it comes to their personal lives of how they live and versus what they say. we as a nation have to begin making much tougher choices than we've been willing to make up till now. We need to make much more difficult choices than we've been willing to make up until this point. Because as you can tell by the heat wave that is absolutely roasting both the Pacific Northwest and the East Coast right now, the climate is changing. The world is getting hotter. Records are being broken every single day during this heat wave. And at some point, we have to recognize that this is going to require us to make some difficult choices. And so far, we've been unwilling to do that. We have not been willing to do that. And that's the challenge. And that's where I'm very disappointed in the U.S. Olympic Committee and the way that we've decided we're going to travel with our air conditioners. Would it made harder? Absolutely. But at some point, we have to take this seriously. Anyway, my relatives, I hope these thoughts, again, are thought-provoking for you. I appreciate you taking time to join me for my second cup of iced coffee. It's good to share some thoughts with you. If you want to be a part of what I'm doing and help keep my voice as independent as possible, there are two ways that you can do that. Even though YouTube shows commercials on my videos, I don't monetize them, so I get no money from the commercials that they show. I do that because I don't want advertisers in any way influencing what I say or do not say on my podcast. And so one of the ways I do raise support for the work I'm doing and fund the work I'm doing is through my Patreon site. And I've actually put up a few things on my Patreon site just in the past few weeks. Last month, at the end of last month, on my Patreon, the Join the Conversation tier, as well as some stuff I'm going to put up this week on my Decolonizing Faith tier. I have been doing some thinking around the mentality of discovery and how destructive that mentality is, not just in the past, but even as we continue to move forward, because the U.S. has never gotten over its mentality of discovery. And that mentality of discovery is rooted in our lie of white supremacy. And so I've been talking about that more directly and figuring out a way to bring that more concretely into my events that I speak on. I talk about it at length in my June presentation for the Join the Conversation tier. And when I spoke in North Dakota last week at the Lewis and Clark event offering Indigenous perspective on the Lewis and Clark Trail, I actually brought in the destructiveness of the mentality of discovery and what we need to do to begin to address that. And so I'm going to be talking about those things more at length on my Patreon this next month. And I welcome you to join me there. Of course, you can always get copies of my book if you'd like to get a signed copy of Unselling Truths, or if you'd like to start a book study. I'm still running my book study special where if you buy 10 copies of my book from my website, I will, up to a year after you make the purchase, I will allow you to schedule a 45-minute virtual Q&A with me in your study at some time over the next year, and do a virtual Q&A with your book study, talking about questions coming from the book. So anyway, both of those are ways that you can dig deeper into the stuff I'm talking about, as well as support my voice and help keep it as independent as possible. But my relatives, thank you very much. I want to thank everyone who jumped on here. Russell, Yá'át'ééh, thanks for being here. Shantina, Yá'át'ééh, thanks for being here. There's others who are on. Purple Blatt Toys. I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but thanks for being here. I appreciate everyone. My relatives, walk in beauty. And may we all learn how to walk in beauty together. Yá'át'ééh and Hako'o.